This is a case that they're talking about where I have said before, and I'll say again, because I'm all about our Constitution as far as freedom of speech, freedom of this, freedom of that. But our ancestors had no earthly ideal that whenever they enacted the freedom of speech law, that we was going to have people out there that was going to be violating the freedom of speech law by saying stuff unwillingly against our favor. Kind of like they take the burning of the flag and dishonoring our patriot song, Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. No one in their right mind pertaining to our constitutional framers, our forefathers, intended for anybody to come on to our soil and disrespect what our original concept was in glorifying God Almighty, the righteous, holy God. It's one thing if you want to practice Satanism. It's one thing if you're willing to even die for Satanism. But to purposely come out onto either live TV or radio and slander the Christian society that supports the Lord Jesus Christ versus being against Satan, vice versa. It's one thing to do what you're doing in secretly in behind closed doors, and it's another thing to be doing it openly. What you're fixing to hear is basically our adversary coming on and into our environment right here in the USA and manipulating the true concept of freedom of speech in behalf of our adversary's favor. This is not what our forefathers intended for people to come over here and manipulate our Constitution this way. I have said this before. I'll say it again. The fox, or the enemy, is not at the gate, but rather he is in the gate. He's in the chicken coop. And he's gobbling down all the chickens and all the sheep, just like a bunch of them being herd to slaughter. And until enough American people, true American patriots, true American Christian people, wisen up to this tactic, it's only going to grow worse and worse and worse. Regardless whether it's coming in the form of what this individual is talking to the American people about, or it's coming in the form towards somebody thinking that they can purposely walk out here and burn the American flag and disrespect our allegiance. Please listen. This is very, very gruesome to hear what this individual is talking about.
On the floor of the U.S. Senate. This guy gets a bonus.
There's something else, and my bias on this is I'm a Cold War baby, son of a World War II era veteran, and this really got my attention. I'm going to quote from the Kansas City Star. This is about Radio Sputnik. A Kansas City area radio station can broadcast Russian state-owned media programming. the type that U.S. intelligence called a propaganda machine, for 6 hours a day through a lease agreement struck by a local radio operator. This is an American station owner or chain of stations, presumably knowingly agreeing.
Now keep in mind, before we go any further with this, 30 plus years ago, I was speaking in a radio station right up here in Union City on Sunday mornings that I had done already paid for a slot, several slots, towards being able to put my message out to the general public. Within the third message, it had done already reached the attentive ears of the wrong person here in this area, to the point that they found out just exactly who I was and where I was working, and cornered me up and told me that if I did not quit preaching what I was preaching on open live broadcast radio, that I could seek employment elsewhere. And the whole time, I was not preaching Muslim, I was not preaching Hinduism, I was not preaching some other kind of far-fetched occult. I was not preaching other than preaching out of the King James Version Bible, interpreting scriptures the way that I felt like God had given me the ability to interpret them, and issuing them out to other people so that they could hear how that I had interpreted them, and they could make their own conscious choice if they had interpreted the scriptures the same as I had. What's more, not adding to or taking from, but using pure, raw logic, common sense of issuing out my message. I got shunned. I got ridiculed. I got persecuted, demonized, dehumanized, and told to get off the radio station, just like all these other churches around here that wound up banning me and telling me that I was not welcome because they did not pre-approve of the way that I had interpreted the Bible in latter, last day biblical prophecy. So as we listen to more of this, I want you to be the judge in asking yourself a common, simple question. Do you believe that what these two individuals are talking about breaks all common sense ethnic policies that our original ancestors, yes, did declare in a declaration of freedom of speech, but done so in a common sense form that it was to be used in a positive, justifiable, just, righteous way, and not in a evil, demented, cruel, insensitive, harsh way. Please listen.
To plug a wire.
Let's back it up a little bit. Stop right there.
An American.
That's right there. Kansas City radio station agrees to broadcast Russian-owned propaganda program. See, there comes a time that we as Americans can no longer sell our dignity down the road for the highest bidder. Propaganda program. Kansas City area radio station can broadcast Russian state-owned media programming, the type that U.S. Intel called a propaganda machine, for 6 hours a day unless agreement struck by local radio stations operators. 6 hours a day through a lease agreement struck by a local radio operator. So they can get on our network. And it's one thing for open media pertaining to social media in regards to the internet. That's using kind of like a free highway system that's available for all people, regardless whether you be from one country or another. But to think that you're going to come into the centermost parts of the United States and you're going to use our equipment, our knowledge, and you're going to warp the minds of hundreds, possibly thousands of people that get a hold of this propaganda that the Russians are spewing out to the American people? Do you believe that this should be tolerated in America the same as do you believe that it is justifiable or okay to burn the American flag in the center of the streets or in front of the courthouse and by law can't the law do nothing about it? Ask yourself that question as you're watching this. Please listen. And I haven't heard it myself other than what I've already done played.
Station owner or chain of stations, presumably knowingly agreeing to plug a wire into their programming for a local Kansas City audience that is Radio Sputnik. This gets your attention.
It's got my attention, and it should get the American people's attention. This is Russian propaganda now broadcast in the heartland of the United States. And you say, well, do they really know what's happening? This owner of this station was forced to file a Foreign Agents Registration Act. He knows darn well what's going on. And so now this is information warfare coming to the middle of America. And Americans have a choice to make.
What did he say? Information warfare? They're weaponizing their tactics and using the Constitution to stand under the umbrella of having the same rights as we have. But yet and all, I didn't have the right to pay for slots on WENK AM radio station to broadcast my message on Sunday morning the same as any other church. I didn't have the right to get on there and tell people how that I had interpreted the scriptures and what I thought about various interpretation of various scriptures. So you tell me, after you listen to this, what you think about all this.
There need to be far more sophisticated at tuning out what is going to be a barrage of propaganda, or they need to become numb and forget what they stand for as Americans.
Is there a role for municipal types, a mayor, a member of Congress, local protesters?
I think that, we've moved from thinking government was the solution. So ordinarily you'd say, well, the FCC, the FBI, the DOJ. It's time for local citizens to say, we don't want this station here. We don't want to listen to it. We don't want Russian propaganda here. We want you out.
And one more you weren't expecting on your dance card tonight. Just around dinner time tonight, we learned 50 traumatic brain injuries suffered by American men and women in uniform during the rocket attack, the back and forth volley with Iran. This is a whole new big number. This is the signature wound of our last two wars.
Well, we just finished talking about Russian propaganda. The question we have to ask ourselves is this White House giving us propaganda about injured U.S. service members? Why did it take so long? I understand fog of war. I understand they need to quantify the injuries. This has taken way too long for the truth to come out, and the credibility of our entire system is at stake.
I hate what we have to discuss, but you're the best at it. Thank you very much. Frank Figliuzzi here with us tonight. Coming up, why is Fox News so concerned about whether the Democrats are being mean to Bernie Sanders? We'll take on that when we come back.
In this country yet. And no, I don't see that yet. Is it possible? We are not immune to the laws of history. And if we give up our protections, if we no longer value the rule of law and the appropriateness of journalism that is much heavier on objectivity than it is on opinion. If we don't value those things appropriately, then I fear not that we're going to become Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, but it's not going to be a happy place. And we have seen periods like that in this country. The McCarthy era in this country in the early 1950s was much closer to that. People lived in fear. People lived in fear of expressing honest opinions out loud. So we've come dangerously close in the past, and I think we are at least in a position today where it's not beyond the question. I mean, it's not beyond possibility that we can slide more in that direction. But do I see a precise parallel with Nazi Germany? I do not.
Ted Koppel, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And finally, the ongoing wrestling match between the Trump administration and the press intensifies. The State Department has barred NPR veteran reporter Michelle Kellerman from joining Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on his upcoming foreign trip. This comes days after a tense interview with another NPR journalist, and President Trump weighed in on that today at the White House unveiling ceremony.
That reporter couldn't have done too good a job on you yesterday. I think you did a good job on her, actually.
Now, as I said, NPR has been barred from Pompeo's upcoming trip. The State Department's Correspondent Association has called the move retaliation and punishment. Let it be a reminder that the health of our democracy depends on a free press able to bring you the truth. That is it for now. You can always catch us online, on our podcast, and across social media. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from London.
It's really sad towards the things that are going on that are deepening and widening more of a divide than it is bringing us together and unifying us. And of course, you know as well as I do, anytime a nation becomes this divided rather than united, it only weakens us from the inside out. And that's exactly what our adversary, our enemy, would love to do, is to see us destroyed, just like a cancer, the same way that Rome was destroyed. That would just be to no avail of how happy that our adversary would be if this occurred. You know, all last year in 2019, I kept telling my viewers again and again and again how that this anti-Semitism was growing in various places, not just here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, but I kept telling people how that it was growing, not just in schools, but also in churches, universities, amongst priests and rabbis, and it is. We are seeing more and more attacks upon to the Christian society today, not just here in America, but throughout the world. than we have ever seen on this planet ever before. And it's really, really sad whenever a society is so blinded towards the blind leading the blind that they cannot recognize or just don't care of the occurrences that's going on right up underneath our noses. Right up underneath our noses. How that it has basically corrupted, profaned, how that it has manipulated a society of people of calling good bad and bad good.
It's like a graveyard of American military hardware.
I'm thankful to Nema for her reporting and for the risk that she took to get this story, because apparently the United States military did not know.
The fight for the old city is the closing chapter of ISIS's present. They have left absolute devastation in their wake. Extraordinary to stand exactly where ISIS may in fact have been plotting attacks against the West.
This is a strange new world in Syria, the end game of the fight against ISIS. NATO ally facing NATO ally.
The United States said that you have fired missiles for another step. That's a lie. What would be the consequence of an American military strike on Iran? An all-out war. We get rare permission to enter. We're headed now deep inside gang territory.
Venezuela's dark lurch into poverty and chaos. This crisis all created by the mad policies of a government that now wants to hide the collapse.
Eerily quiet, isn't it? This city almost constantly living with the threat of a Russian invasion.
Mission planning, American air power.
I'm Anna Stewart in the City of London, and this is CNN.
Hello and welcome to our viewers joining us from all around the world. Great to have you with us. I'm John Bors. Coming up on CNN Newsroom, China sees a surge in confirmed cases of the Wuhan virus, overtaking the number of patients infected on the mainland during the deadly SARS outbreak. The US president calls it the deal of the century, the opportunity of the century, say the Israelis. As for the Palestinians, it's the slap of the century. But their opinion of this long-awaited plan for Mideast peace doesn't seem to matter. And bolting down the hatches at Trump's impeachment trial, Senate leader Mitch McConnell facing a revolt from some Republicans who want to hear from former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Start with the very latest from the Wuhan coronavirus and a grim new milestone in China, which now reports nearly 6,000 cases, meaning this outbreak has officially surpassed the number of SARS cases China reported in 2003. Some of the other big developments, the virus has claimed 132 lives, all of them in China, where state media reports some patients have recovered and have been discharged from hospital. But the number of confirmed cases globally continues to rise. And after repeatedly declining offers of international assistance, China has now agreed to allow the World Health Organization to send in teams of scientific and medical experts. For the very latest now, CNN's Stephen Zhang live in Beijing. So what specifically, Stephen, do we know about these expert teams? When will they arrive? What will they do? And why is Beijing being so reluctant to accept their help?
Well, John, on that front, no specifics yet in terms of when the WHO will be sending these experts into China, but at least during the meeting between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the head of the WHO on Tuesday, they agree to further collaboration on many fronts, including containment measures in Wuhan, public health measures in other Chinese cities. Probably more importantly, in addition to sending experts in, is agreed to continue sharing data, including Chinese authorities promising sharing to share biological material. Why is that important? Because the one of the alarming trend we have seen here in China is people without any symptoms infecting other people. In the latest example of that, on Tuesday, authorities announced a case of a young woman. She lives in Wuhan but went back to her home for the Lunar New Year on January 10th. So far, she has not displayed any symptoms, but she has already infected 5 family members, none of whom had ever been to Wuhan. So it's cases like this, John, makes this virus, there is still so much unknown about this virus. That's why collaboration with the international community and experts from the outside may really help, because so far, a lot of outside experts say if that's indeed the case, it could be a game changer in how to really prevent and contain this virus. Because if you're not showing symptoms, then a lot of measures that authorities have put in place could be futile attempt. If you're checking temperatures and people are not having temperatures, then that may not really help. So, John, at least right now, they agree to let outside experts in, but we don't know a lot of specifics at this moment.
Okay, well, they've agreed to it. That's a start. We'll see when it happens. Stephen, thank you for the update. We appreciate it. As many countries begin airlifting their citizens out of Wuhan, they then face the problem of minimizing the risk of the virus spreading once they arrive home. In the coming hours, a plane carrying up to 240 Americans will return to the US from Wuhan, first stopping in Alaska, where they'll be screened, and then they'll be flown to a military base in Southern California. Once there, they could be held and monitored for up to 2 weeks in an isolated hangar.
We're getting them all set up, and hopefully as many comforts at home as you can have in a hangar at this standpoint, with beds, and we're bringing TVs in for the Super Bowl. They're gonna be lasting there that long to watch over the weekend, and chargers for their phones, and just try to make their life as good as possible.
And joining me now.
And keep in mind, this could happen to any of us at any given time, to where we was ordered to go into a quarantine place and remain there until our health either got better or the bug finished us off. This could happen to any of us. This is very serious.
Carlos Del Rio, Professor of Medicine and Global Health at Emory University in Atlanta. Doctor, first question for you. How concerned are you at this point in the surge in the death toll, as well as the number of reported infections? Is it a question of what's behind that increase? Is it more awareness and better testing, or is it the nature of the virus itself?
I think it's a combination of both. I think you have transmission ongoing, but you also have more testing and more detection. So I'm not terribly surprised the number of cases has increased significantly. We're close to 5,000 cases, of which the great majority are in China. We're now over 100 deaths. The cases will continue to go up, and mathematical modeling suggests that probably they will peak somewhere in mid to early to mid-February.
Well, CNN is reporting that researchers at Melbourne's Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity have successfully recreated the virus. Explain why that is significant and potentially good news in terms of developing a vaccine.
Well, it's going to be very important to develop a vaccine for this virus, and there's several strategies, and one of them is the so-called recreation of the virus. But the virus is available, so people are actually using the live virus. You don't need to recreate it. You can just use the virus to create a vaccine. In fact, the NIH was developing the vaccine based on what they knew of the sequence of the virus. You don't need the virus nowadays to create a vaccine. So the NIH has a vaccine that is going to go into testing through the vaccine treatment and evaluation units, which are part of the NIH-funded vaccine trials network. Sometime in mid-March, early April, the Hong Kong has a vaccine, China has a vaccine, Australia. So there'll be several vaccines. But we have to remember that when SARS occurred several years ago, we were able to contain it without having a vaccine. By the time there was a vaccine, the epidemic was over. So simple public health measures such as isolation, quarantine, hand washing, respiratory hygiene is what we need to control the transmission and decrease the number of new infections.
Well, which is precisely what is sort of underway right now. When you look at what's happening in places around the world, there's locate the infected, get them into some kind of isolation early and continue to treat them while keeping them away from the rest of the population.
Exactly.
China, though, is doing that right now on an industrial scale. Do you see potential there for those measures to backfire?
Well, I think there are very few countries in the world can do what they're doing, and China is about the only country that can do it. I think if you would try to do that in New York or Atlanta, it would be virtually impossible to lock down a city like that, and there'll be probably civil disobedience and riots happening. but China is able to do it, and I think it's an incredible experiment. I don't know what's going to happen. I think that Chinese are trying to do, everything they can to try to stop that. I think they realize what the potential consequences are, and the most serious consequence, besides the human toll, is obviously the economic consequence. Any epidemic like this has tremendous impact on the economy in a country, and this could have a significant impact on the economy of China. And that, to me, is the biggest concern from a world perspective, is the economic slowdown and the potential recession that could result as a result of this pandemic.
Around the world, we're seeing governments moving to isolate, though.
I just heard from a farmer today where the bean prices has plummeted yesterday because of this crisis that's going on. I've also paid attention to the stock market and seen where other markets is responding and reacting to this negativity that's going on. So it's not the question of if, it is now how bad is what's going on in China going to affect the rest of the markets in the rest of the world and other places of the world economically pertaining to hitting people in the back end of their wallets.
Who've recently traveled to Wuhan, a measure which, again, not without critics. The latest is Dr. Paul Offord, a pediatric infectious disease expert from the University of Pennsylvania. He made this point: when someone on a plane is found to have influenza, fellow passengers are not quarantined. He said, we don't do this for the flu, and it's known to cause 30,000 deaths in the US every year. I guess the question which follows from that is, why is there a need to do it for this strain of flu?
Well, again, this, first of all, this is not flu. This is a different virus, and we don't know enough about it. And I agree with Paul in the sense that there's a horrible virus out there. It's a respiratory virus that has killed already over 6,000 Americans this season, and that's called influenza. And we tend to be very blasé about influenza, and people don't get the vaccines. But we do have antivirals that work against influenza. So I have somebody with influenza today, I can start them on medications and their vaccines. So we feel we're a little more prepared for influenza. I think with this virus, it's a bit of the uncertainty that has created this sense, and this government's wanting to isolate people. But, rather than bringing somebody to the hospital, I would just keep them at home. We have to limit transmission. That's the most important thing.
Well, in the United States, the Health and Human Services Secretary is calling for China to be more open and what it knows about this virus. Here he is.
We are urging China. More cooperation and transparency are the most important steps you can take toward a more effective response.
That seems to be sort of contrary to what the WHO has been saying about the cooperation it's received from Beijing. In fact, the WHO has been very positive about how it's seen the cooperation from China. So from your point of view, how do you see things?
Well, I think that China has been more transparent than it has been in the past, but it's still not enough. And I think what WHO and I think what Secretary Azar are asking is for China to allow researchers and public health experts from WHO, from CDC, from NIH, from Imperial College, from other places, from London School of Tropical Medicine and others, to be able to go into China and help contain the outbreak. And I think Secretary Azar is absolutely right. We are asking for China to open so international collaboration and cooperation can happen. They are clearly not able to control this on their own. They need more help. They need more scientists. And people are wanting to go and willing to go, and controlling this outbreak should be an international priority. So I strongly support Secretary Azar's request.
Okay, Dr. Carlos Del Rio, thanks so much. Appreciate you being with us.
Not a problem.
US President Donald Trump is calling his long-delayed Middle East peace plan a win-win opportunity. There's no doubt it's a win for the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
If the Palestinians are genuinely prepared to take that path, if they're genuinely prepared to make peace with the Jewish state, and if they agree to abide by all the conditions you have put forward in your plan, Israel will be there. Israel will be prepared to negotiate peace right away.
The question is, what's there to negotiate? Palestinians are outraged. Large crowds protested in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas called the plan the slap of the century.
All our rights are not for sale or for negotiation. Your deal is a conspiracy and it will not work.
Notably, though, there was no criticism from Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Instead, both countries offered encouraging statements, and the United Arab Emirates called it an important starting point. CNN's Oren Lieberman breaks down the details.
For the Israelis and for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is no doubt an historic moment. Whether the rest of the world sees it that same way is, at least right now, irrelevant to Israel and the United States. The Trump administration's vision for Middle East peace gives Israel just about everything that it wants and more, and it leaves the Palestinians little room or incentive to engage. Effectively, the administration has said that everything Israel controls right now, it can keep as its own, greenlighting Israel's annexation of some 30% of the West Bank. The White House said it would recognize Israeli sovereignty in the Jordan Valley and in all of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised he would take action on that on Sunday at the cabinet meeting. The first stage, he said, would be annexation of the Jordan Valley and the settlements in what he called Judea and Samaria, using the biblical term for the West Bank. The second stage would be annexing the remaining area given to Israel under this plan and recognized as part of Israel. The White House also said Jerusalem is Israel's undivided capital, offering the Palestinians only a few small neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, separated from Jerusalem by a physical barrier. This is a much bigger political gift to Netanyahu than anything we've seen from the White House over the last couple of years. Recognition of the Golan Heights, Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy, those were certainly significant, but largely symbolic. No doubt symbols are certainly important here, but it didn't change anything on the ground. And this very much changes facts on the ground, especially since Israel is moving to annex next week. More than just a gift to Israel, it is a gift to the settler movement in the West Bank, who will have not only the application of Israeli law, annexation, but American recognition to go with it. What for all this was the cost for Netanyahu? He had to agree, in principle, to the future creation of a Palestinian state if they meet certain requirements that are nearly impossible for them to meet, and in which they'll see little reason to even try to meet. Netanyahu had to say he would make a payment in the future to be given everything for free right now. The plan itself places no substantial burden on Israel. The stringent requirements and demands are all on the Palestinians. Now, earlier in the day, Netanyahu had been formally indicted on charges of bribery and fraud and breach of trust. That, in and of itself, would have been the major news of the day. But this Trump plan quickly overshadowed that. Even under indictment and heading for trial, Netanyahu will be welcomed home as a hero of the right wing when he comes back to Israel. Oren Lieberman, CNN, Jerusalem.
Presidential son-in-law and senior White House advisor Jared Kushner is the main architect of this peace plan. During an interview with CNN's Christiane Amanpour, he defended it while urging the Palestinians to sign on board.
The Israeli Prime Minister has stated that this weekend he will impose the laws of the State of Israel, those are the words out of his mouth, on the Jordan Valley, on those areas in the West Bank, he calls it Judea and Samaria, where there are settlements and other such places, and presumably over Jerusalem as well, or I don't know about Eastern Jerusalem, but nonetheless, if that happens this weekend, is that with the approval of the United States?
Yeah, I don't believe that's going to happen this weekend, at least not as far as I know. But again, a lot of these areas, just the reality is that Israel's there and they're not leaving. There's never been a deal where they've contemplated doing it, and it's not pragmatic. I'm not looking at the world as it existed in 1967. I'm looking at the world as it exists in 2020. You have 5 million Palestinians who are really trapped because of bad leadership. So what we've done is we've created an opportunity for their leadership to either seize or not. If they screw up this opportunity, which again, they have a perfect track record of missing opportunities. If they screw this up, I think that they will have a very hard time looking the international community in the face, saying they're victims, saying they have rights. This is a great deal for them. If they come to the table and negotiate, I think they can get something excellent.
We'll hear a lot more from Jared Kushner and that interview in the next hour, right here on CNN. Well, in the meantime, it's the end of the beginning of Trump's impeachment trial and still no real indication if witnesses will be allowed to testify. Right now, the top Republican in the U.S. Senate says he doesn't have the numbers to stop them. Also ahead this hour, the first close-up look at the site where Kobe Bryant's helicopter went down as more details emerge of what may have caused the crash.
Looking for
Good luck to all of us. Shalom.